I am Lisa Cummins with Moms for America, and this morning we are have the pleasure to hear from Michael Maibach, who we heard from 2 years ago, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago. It seems like 2 years ago. No, 2 weeks ago on the Electoral College. Today, Michael will be discussing the Electoral College and the national popular vote and how that would be detrimental to America. So I'm going to now turn the time over to Michael, and please follow us on Facebook and ask questions, and then we can relay them to Michael after his presentation. So Michael, I give it to you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, and thanks to Vivian as well. I'm going to open today for Moms for America with a brief review of the situation in the Constitutional Convention, and then we'll go right to the national popular vote risk that I mentioned here. Cicero wrote that if you don't know history, you'll always be a child. Matter of fact, as we see young people ripping down statues, we're pretty sure they hadn't ever read a book about the people that are ripping statues down. So mature, thoughtful citizens know their history. They know how imperfect man is and how problematic self-government is. You can look anywhere around the world and see that government is difficult. So in the summer of 1787, 12 of the 13 states sent delegates to Philadelphia. Rhode Island wouldn't even send a delegation, so much did they distrust the large states and what they were up to, including Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and Massachusetts. Those were the big 4 states at the time. But they gave us a constitution. Yesterday was Constitution Day, the 17th. We have this rich inheritance that I think most all of us appreciate. When we get into the national popular vote discussion, the first thing to keep in mind, if you have a few takeaways to the speech, is people say, well, in democracy, the majority should rule. But of course, from Plato to Aristotle to Montesquieu to Jefferson to Madison, all of those philosophers, if you will, suspected democracy is a problem, mob rule. We saw in the French Revolution what happened to their parliament. They ended up with Napoleon. So we're a republic, and we have to keep that in mind. A republic is a nation of states, just like Germany is a republic, a nation of staats, if you will. So in the summer of 1787, Mr. Madison, they convened because of his will and intelligence and the problems of the Articles of Confederation. And he wrote in his diary when he arrived in Philadelphia from his home in Orange County, Virginia, that the central problem we're going to face in this Constitutional Convention will be one of representation. How do you represent the interests of states as states? Because remember, 12 states were assembling, not just individual states, regions. That the New England climate and history and economy is very different than Georgia or Virginia, etc. And how do you represent people as citizens? Now, just to give you a flavor of what was going on, there was a delegate from Delaware, Gunning Bedford, I love that name, and he gave a talk on June 30th in the floor of the Constitutional Hall, which is behind me. This is a photo of the room, which you can visit in Philadelphia, where this Constitution was written. I do not, gentlemen, trust you. If you possess the power, the abuse of it could not be checked. And what then would prevent you from exercising it to our destruction? He was talking about the large states. The larger states, he says, would be rivals of one another, you tell us. This is language calculated only to amuse. Yes, sir, the larger states will be rivals, but not against each other. They will be rivals against the rest of us. So there were 9 small states, like Delaware had 59,000 people, and Virginia had 750,000 people. Georgia had 75,000 people. So you get the idea. This was a large state, small state problem. And here we have the population of these two states that I mentioned, the largest and the smallest. So that was a central problem. And there was the Virginia Plan, the Jersey Plan, and the Great Compromise, which is called the Connecticut Compromise. Roger Sherman, a very important man, my friend Mark David Hall has written a book, a biography of Roger Sherman, if you want to get it on Amazon. Very fine book about his role in the Constitutional Convention in brokering the two senators per state and the House by population. That balance of the House and the Senate was Roger Sherman's doing. And this is James Wilson, a delegate from Pennsylvania. He's a Scottish immigrant and was on the first Supreme Court. Washington appointed him first Supreme Court. And he was the one at the end of the Constitutional Convention that brokered the compromise in the Committee of 11, it was called, to create an electoral college. Matter of fact, Hamilton in Federalist number 9 wrote, and this was really a letter to the delegates at the New York Constitutional Ratification Convention. The proposed Constitution, far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate. And of course, we would have state-by-state election of the president, which he gets into in Federal 68 and Federal 70, if you want to look at those. So we have an electoral college of states, originally 13, and now we have all 50 states as electoral college. And this system of states is what we call federalism. And it's used in lots of places in the world, not just here. The Canadians have provinces, for example, and on and on. They're the same thing in Australia. So this is we're a nation of states. This is our electoral college system, and it served us very well. We saw in the very disruptive, sort of like this year, election of 1860, probably this year's presidential election and the one of 1860 are the two most important and most dramatic presidential elections in our history for very different reasons, I guess you would say. But Lincoln, who only got 39.8% of the vote because there were 4 people running, but Lincoln won the majority of the states, 18. And therefore, rather than people focusing on 60% of the people voted against Lincoln, Lincoln was declared the winner because he got the majority of states. And remember, southern states were seceding from the Union before he was sworn in. 6 of them had before he was sworn in. And they seceded by states, if you will. So these are the electoral votes of 1860. And we got a winner, and you can see that Stephen Douglas only won Missouri. And then, of course, this Southern candidate got most of the South, et cetera, et cetera. Since 1828, which was the Jacksonian election, all U.S. presidents have won a majority of the states, except in 2 elections. Kennedy, 23 states, and Jimmy Carter, 23. That's because they had third-party candidates. George Wallace, I believe it was, in the case of 1960, and then Jimmy Carter also won a minority of the states. But the Electoral College really became controversial, starting with Bush v. Gore. When Bush defeated Gore, even though Gore got couple 100,000 more votes out of 100 million cast. So it was very close, very close. However, Mr. Bush won 30 of the 50 states. Gore won 20. And then the very dramatic contretemps in 2016, when Mrs. Clinton won about 2.5 million, 2 million votes more than Mr. Trump, but he won 30 states out of 50, just like Bush did versus Gore. And therefore is declared the winner because he had the majority of, I think, 307 of the Electoral College. However, if you took away the votes from California, both Republican and Democrat, Trump won the election. The California, with its 40 million people and its millions of voters, really made the big difference there. However, ever since then, many especially in the progressive left and Democratic Party, believe that we should abolish the Electoral College. It's just unfair. I had more pieces. We must abolish chess. Even though in chess you can have very few pieces and win if you have a different strategy. But there are many that believe, democracy is simply majority rule. The Electoral College is a form of voter suppression. 2000 and 2016 are on that placard. And it's undemocratic. It's just not right. But the United States of America is not a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. And a democracy is majority rule and does not respect minority rights. So let's look at a few undemocratic things about the American form of self-government. The presidential veto, the House and Senate with majorities could pass something, and one man, the president, or one woman one of these days, can veto an act of Congress, and it takes an extraordinary majority. So that's undemocratic. And the U.S. Senate, we have, at least right now, we have a filibuster, which is the minority can stop the majority, 51 votes, from doing something in the U.S. Senate in many cases. I guess you could say that's undemocratic. And why does Delaware or Rhode Island have 2 U.S. senators, and California with 40 million people also have 2 U.S. senators? In other words, if you get rid of the Electoral College because you say it's undemocratic, well, that just leads to a conversation about the whole U.S. Senate is undemocratic, and let's make it into the House of Representatives, where California, let's say, would have 30 senators or something like that. And then finally, we have 9 unelected justices. There they are with their black robes. And black robes, by the way, is a symbol that they're supposed to keep their emotions, their heart out of it, and only use reason and good judgment. And that's why they have those robes. But there's nothing democratic about these judges saying that the House or the Senate or the president have acted unconstitutionally, or the states. Is it undemocratic that the people, the teams that win the World Series is because they win the most games, even if they didn't score the most runs in the World Series? Or the people that go to the Super Bowl are those not that have the most touchdowns, but those that have the most games? And Mrs. Pelosi is the Speaker of the House, not because the majority of the voters in U.S. House races were Democrats, but her team won the most races, if you will, and therefore they have enough team wins, which candidates in the House, to elect her. And finally, there's nothing democratic about the Bill of Rights. My gosh, even one person's freedom of religion or speech should be defended against majority tyranny. And these are the reasons why the founders were for Republican small r, and not for pure democracy, which of course always turns into tyranny, as Plato tells us in Plato's Republic. However, there is a very well-funded campaign, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which you can go to their website if you want and see their activities, very well funded, mostly by very wealthy millionaires in California, who would like to, in effect, have California decide every presidential election, because they don't want to have these past elections where the majority didn't win happen again. They want to recalibrate to a national popular vote. Now, I'll just briefly try to describe what the national popular vote scheme is. The states that pass this compact commit to direct their presidential electors to vote in December in the state capitol in accordance with the results of the national popular vote winner, even if the voters of their own state vote for a different candidate. So it's really an assault or an affront to the voters in their own state to say, we would rather have California, New York, and Chicago, Illinois decide this rather than the voters here in our state. The compact aims to create a de facto circumvention of the U.S. Constitution's Electoral College process, absent the concurrence of 38 states. That's what it takes to amend the Constitution. They're trying to amend the Constitution without asking 38 states to do so, because the smaller states would never agree to this. We wouldn't have a Constitution if the smaller states didn't agree to the Electoral College. The compact takes effect once the Electoral College votes of the NPV states total 270 or more. And as of August, as of last month, 15 states and DC have joined this compact. That's an act of the legislature, a signature of the governor, or in the case DC, the mayor. They need 74 additional electors to create a constitutional crisis. And they're active trying to do that here in Virginia today to get our 13. So this is an ongoing constitutional front, if you will. And these are the states that have passed this. Although on November 3rd, the voters of Colorado are using a referendum part of their constitution to try to overturn this. So we will see if the Colorado voters decide not to become part of the National Popular Vote Compact. So if you live in Colorado, I hope you'll vote to get rid of that. We think that the NPV is unconstitutional because in Article 1, it says states may not, without the consent of Congress, enter into agreements with other states. In other words, remember what Mr. Bedford said from Delaware. He said, we think you're going to gang up on the smaller states. Well, these are the progressive states, if you will. These are all blue states. All 15 have a Senate, a House, and a governor that are all Democratic, not Republican in their party, all ganging up on the smaller states, if you will. And of course, constitutional amendments have to be 3/4 of the states, not just the majority of the electoral votes. So that's the first problem. The second one is, at least here in Virginia, the Virginia Constitution provides that only Virginia residents are entitled to vote for elected officials. I happen to be a presidential elector this year, and therefore I'm an elected official in Virginia. The NPV compact would allow voters across the nation, like in California, to select how our Virginia presidential electors will vote, even though they don't live here in Virginia. We think this is unconstitutional based on our state constitution here in Virginia, and maybe it is with you as well. I don't know where everyone lives here on the call here today. Number 3, it's in the front to the voters, whether it's Virginia voters or others, which is, in other words, ignore how our state is voted. We'll go with the majority of voters in other states. This is what our country's map would look like if we did it by population. So most of you can't find your state here. If you don't live in California, Texas, Florida, New York, or maybe Illinois, you just won't be on the map anymore. The candidates would just go from city to city and big state to big state. 9 U.S. states have 51% of the voters. 9 states have half of the people of our country, and they're in the dark blue here. 10 largest cities in the United States are in 6 states. The 20 largest metropolitan areas in America have almost half of our population. They're listed here from those 15 states. 38 states have fewer people than New York City, and Virginia has the same number, so that would be sort of 39. Nassau County, which is one of the 3 counties on Long Island, not part of New York City, Nassau County has more people than 10 of our states. Only 9 states have more people than Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has more people than all but 9 states, including California, its own state. Number 5, the NPV ignores the unique cultures, histories, and economies of our 50 states. We are a completely diverse country. My gosh, I mean, if you go to Belgium, it's kind of different, but here we're planets apart. This is Los Angeles. What fun this must be. This is Montana. This is in the same country. This is Manhattan. This is Iowa. Now, one of the things I want to mention is that it takes a lot of land to grow crops and have cattle. And therefore, there aren't a lot of people where there's farming because you don't have room for this. You have to have room for this. And so these nice people in the small, least populous states, let's talk about Montana, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, etc., they are feeding the rest of the country. And if we went to an election just by the large cities, because that's what national popular vote would be, a campaign to New York, Miami, Houston, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, a couple of other cities, that would turn these people that are actually feeding those cities into serfs. And they would feel that way, and they wouldn't want to be in a union where a few large states and cities, I told you, 9 states have half of our population. The rest are feeding those 9 states, and they won't want to be serfs for very long. So you want to get rid of the United States of America and have secession on your hands, get rid of the Electoral College and the system that respects the interests of states. So we have 50 different, number 6 is we have 50 different election laws. For example, starting today in Virginia, I can vote any weekday between now and November 3rd. Probably most of the states don't have that much early voting as we do, but I'm going to actually this afternoon go vote because it starts today and I want to get it done in person. 32 states require IDs to vote, which means 18 do not, including Virginia. Well, where's the equal protection of the law if we're going to have a national popular vote? Good news, dear, they've halted voter ID laws. So now you can keep on voting. A little bit of Chicago humor, since I'm a native of Illinois. 15 U.S. states and D.C. issue driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. These 15 states and D.C. represent 120 million people in this country. 36% of the population gives driver's license to people that are here illegally. So how do you then tell them when they go to vote, well, you're not a legal voter? That really calls into question equal protection of the law if we're going to have national popular vote. And this is where the undocumented population is: California, Texas, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Illinois. And California, New York, New Jersey, and Illinois are 4 of the states that give a driver's license to illegal immigrants. Here's California bill signing, where Governor Jerry Brown signs into law in 2015 driver's licenses. And here is Governor Cuomo signing that bill last year. Driver's licenses for all, legal and illegal. And look, that's a whole different political issue, but but it really calls into question how anyone can prove they're a citizen or they're legally. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots, which is number 7 here. 5 U.S. states have 100% mail-in voting, but only 5. And yet Nevada and many other states are saying this year we're going to mail out ballots to everybody, no matter where you live or how often you've moved. So you have voting by mail because of COVID, which is just going to exacerbate this problem, of course. So that's number 7, which is voter fraud, creating demand for voting U.S. mail without experience. Several states have done it year after year and have good experience, but most states have no experience in this. And I think one of the problems that's going to happen on November 3rd is we will probably have a month or 2 of litigation around this country because of mail-in ballots and ballots coming in after November 3rd and et cetera. Pennsylvania Supreme Court just allowed that Pennsylvania can take up to, I think it's 2 or 3 days after November 3rd to count mail-in ballots that come in late. There'll be ballot harvesting. There is already in California. Lots of opportunity for fraud, bribery of mail carriers to, give me your stack of ballots, et cetera, et cetera. No one will have any proof. Number 8, and this is very important, the National Popular Vote Compact people somehow think that we'll still have a two-party system, Democrats and Republicans. And won't that be nice? We'll have national popular vote, but we'll still have two parties. I think this is a chimera. This is really a dream that will not come true for them, because as soon as we get rid of the states as important, the state parties will not be important, and we'll have candidates. Maybe Mark Zuckerberg will decide with his billions to run for president. Why does he need a party then? He'll just travel around the country to the big cities and have an ad campaign, and we won't need parties anymore. Matter of fact, all across Europe, I mean, Spain has as many as 12 parties. The UK has 6 or 7. Germany has 10. Israel has 10, etc. Most republics have multi-party system, but our electoral college, as it turns out, because we have majority winners in each state. Ross Perot won 20% of the vote and didn't get one electoral college. Eugene Debs ran, I think, 4 or 5 times for president, got up to 20% of the vote one year, no electoral votes at all. And so it doesn't pay in America to run outside the two-party system. You need the state organization of the party. You need the voter affiliation. That will go away. Our political conventions are organized. I've been an alternate delegate from Illinois, actually, when I was in my 20s. Our political conventions are organized around states. Well, that will go away. There'll be no Iowa, New Hampshire primary anymore. And the NPV compact allows plurality winners. So with states no longer important, only two-party system would die, our two-party system. Regional and cause-driven parties would proliferate. The Green Party, the Climate Change Party, the Libertarian Party, the Progressive Party, the Conservative Party, pick your cause, there'll be a party for it. I'm sure Ralph Nader will start another party. Some candidates would not bother at all to even visit small states, and regional candidates might win if we have 5, 10, 15 candidates running, might have a president elected with 27% of the vote because 6 or 7 people divided the vote. And just think of the gridlock without a two-party system. Right now, in January, whoever wins the House of Representatives, it'll probably be the Democrats, we know that they'll walk in and elect a speaker, and it's happened our entire 230-some-year history. The majority party elects a speaker, and there's no coalition government like they have in so many European countries. My gosh, Italy has had, on average, 1 prime minister per year since 1945, believe it or not. They're on their the multiple prime ministers in Italy because of the system that they have. But just think if we had 4, 5, 6 parties and they were represented in this chamber, how would they even elect a speaker with a majority vote? We'd have to have coalitions, and they would fall apart in the middle of the session when they don't get their way on some issue, and then a new coalition would form, and we would have a very different Congress. And talk about gridlock, it'd be gridlock on steroids. Number 9, we may have states that won't give their total votes until the Electoral College meets or just before it meets, so the national popular vote tabulation cannot be done. There was a bill before the New Hampshire legislature, it did not pass this time, that said that our Secretary of State will only release the name of the winning candidate and how many votes they got, not the other candidates, so that the losing candidate, those votes cannot be tabulated as part of the national popular vote, and therefore will deny that the national popular vote could ever be established before the Electoral College meets by the Constitution in December in state capitals. So small states are not going to sit by and watch the large states do this without taking some action, in my estimation. And number 10, if you thought the Florida recount in 2000, just think of what a national recount would be. Honestly, the litigation would never end. So the way to think about the Electoral College is the way a ocean liner is now designed so it doesn't sink like the Titanic. You may recall the movie Titanic. Titanic sunk because one compartment was breached by the iceberg, and then as it filled up with water, it flowed to the next and the next and the next. We have a wonderful system where any recounts, any voter fraud are all isolated within every state and within the state election laws. If we had a national popular vote, if someone brings a litigation and says we have to recount, let's say, Missouri, then the other side would go to court and say, we have to recount the whole country then, because it's not fair just to recount one of the states since we have a national popular vote system. And therefore, what a mess. We would never be able to recount 120, 140 million votes, and people would just have no confidence. When you have an at-large or national popular vote system, that will sink the republic in terms of our ability to have presidential elections, unless the federal government, remember we have 3,400 counties that run elections in this country, and they all have different state rules I've just gone over. If we'd have to have a national recount, and we have such disparities in the systems, like, early voting begins right now in Virginia, but probably not in 40 other states right now, as of today, or more. That would be an equal protection litigation under the Constitution, the 5th and 14th Amendment. We could have the Federal Election Commission have to take over running elections in this country. And then guess what? That's the executive branch. So the president in power would be running the elections of the United States of America for president. Do we want to have Washington, D.C. running elections? A, they do so well at everything else they run. And B, do we want to have the president, the executive branch, in charge of the re-election of their own leader, the president? The national popular vote people have not thought through any of these risks that they are now playing with. This is a Notre Dame cathedral. Remove one of those buttresses and that building comes down. Remove the Electoral College and the Constitution begins to come down. And just to remind people that are online here today, this is the Electoral College in Great Britain. Mr. Boris Johnson, who's Prime Minister today, never was on the ballot across the United Kingdom, only in his own constituency in London. He was elected by Parliament. They have 10 parties in that country for 66 million people. We have 2 parties for 300 million people. This is the Electoral College of Germany. Mrs. Merkel was never on the ballot all across Germany, never in her 10 years as chancellor. She was elected by these people who were elected in their districts, and she was elected from a district just like all the rest. The founders looked at having the Congress appoint our prime minister, our president, as we call him, rather than have the states have popular elections to do it, the Electoral College system. And they said, we do not want the possible corruption and deal making there to make the president really a creature of the legislature and controlled by it. They wanted an independent executive, a commander-in-chief, someone that could veto things that were wrong, checks and balances. They read Montesquieu's book in 1749, which is called Spirit of the Laws, which is really built on the mixed regime ideas found in Aristotle's Politics, the book that he is famous for writing. This is our electoral college, very different than these electoral colleges. And finally, this wonderful man, this saint of a human being, Lincoln wrote, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That, the Constitution, must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties." And if you interfere with the Electoral College through a national popular vote scheme, this end run around the Constitution, you will remove the safeguard to our liberties, which is we're a nation of states, we're not a nation of cities. And by the way, parenthetically, Lots of people criticize the Electoral College system because they say, oh, there's always just a few swing states, and we can name them this year: Nevada, Arizona, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, and Florida. Those are the swing states. But every election has that. It's just they change. It's different. When it used to be, there was a solid South, and what we called the solid South was all Democrat results in the South. Now it's all Republican. So our states change. But if under the national popular vote scheme, we would have swing cities, and the presidential candidates would only visit swing cities and not states at all. They wouldn't care to ever go to Iowa. New Hampshire and Iowa wouldn't have primaries anymore because no one would care about what these farmers and small town people care. We only want to win the popular vote in the big cities. And we see how pacific and polite and wonderfully governed the big cities are in America now when they're not burning things down. And so wouldn't it be great if we just had our large cities running everything and making decisions for the rest of the population? This would be a problem.
Well, thank you so much. I have two of those books with me. I have Saving the Electoral College by Robert Hardaway, Why the National Popular Vote Would Undermine Democracy. So that's one book that you can get that discusses the topic. And another one, more child-friendly, is How We Elect a President, the Story of Our Electoral College by Tara Ross, who is also part of Save Our States. So you can find those on Amazon, or I'm sure on saveourstates.com. And thank you so much again, and we look forward to hearing from you next Friday.
Thank you.